Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about the difference between color styles and variables and when you should use one over the other. Even though they appear to do quite similar things, we need to use both styles and variables together to unlock the full potential of our designs. So let's get into their comparisons. Color styles and color variables fundamentally do quite similar things, which is it allows you to associate colors of elements and components to a color tag. This is quite useful, for example, if you're trying to associate colors to a brand identity, so like a primary color, instead of selecting all your individual components and elements and changing them one at a time, we can just change this color tag, which is a style or variable, and all of these changes will be projected across your project. So now looking at variable properties, we see that we can only assign one single color value. We can change the opacity and we can also create aliases. So aliases is an idea where we can link variables together. So let me show you these three examples down below. We can have a white variable, which has this F hex code and 100% opacity. The second one, we might call it white-50, which is the same hex code, but 50% opacity. And we might have a variable called brand, which might be linked or have an alias with the orange variable, which is linked to this color. Now looking at our styles property, the difference is we can now hold single or multiple color values. We can have opacity, we can also create aliases like our variables, but we have additional features such as blend mode, gradients, images, and videos. So you might be wondering, why would you have multiple values? Let me show you an example with this picture over here. So I'm just going to select my picture element, and you can see I've created two fills here. So here's an example of having multiple values. So the first value is the image, and the second value is this white to black gradient. And the reason I have this gradient is so that I can make the base of the picture a bit darker, which allows the contrast of the text to punch out. And we can also see the other features here. So we have gradient here, we have image, video, and here are the blend modes. So if you've used something like Photoshop, we can apply these blend modes, which you can't apply to a variable. So why use variables if there's so many more properties and styles? And that's because there are three key properties that we can use to our advantage. The first one is creating aliases, which give us more control. An alias just means that we want to connect variables together. And this we can use the advantage of the methodology of design tokens, which creates tiers of variables. So the three tiers that we're going to create is global token, semantic token, and component tokens. So semantic is a term that refers to what it is used for as opposed to what it looks like. So when we normally name styles, we would just describe what it looks like. So if we have a pink color, we'd call that style pink. But using semantic tokens is another way that we can break up our design. So we can see there's three tiers of variables and tokens. So we have at the highest level, the global token, which just defines the color. Then we have the three semantic tokens, so what it's used for. So we have accent or border, we have surfaces, and then we have icons. And then we have our third tier, which is components. So we just have the name of these components. And likewise, we could have a name for this icon, and maybe we'd want to call this palette. So we have this dashed line to indicate how the variables are connected. And the reason why we want to break it up like this is, let's say we want to change all the accents to a new color. If we were to use styles and we had these components, because they're all assigned to the same style, I would have to manually select these components and then change the style like that. However, because we have all our tiers set up, all I need to do is select this accent variable and connect it to a new color token. So that's what we have over here. All we've done is we've connected the semantic token to a new global token, and now we've successfully changed our elements, and this is the way that we can elevate the control in our design. The second benefit is now Figma has allowed more prototyping features when you're using variables. So this includes being able to control variant states based on interactions. So this is a really cool way to create more advanced prototypes. And the third benefit is that we can create new variable modes. So in the same way, we've changed the semantic token to be attached to a different color. We can create modes that allow all these semantic tokens to change. One clear example is if you were to go from light mode to dark mode, you don't want to change these semantic tokens because let's say this component is attached to this accent hover, it will always be attached to that. So what we need to do instead is change the color it's associated to. So let me show an example down here. I have 3 frames and I've associated them with different variable modes. And we can look at it in here. So we have our variable modes. Yep. And here, I'll just show you a breakdown. So we have our primitives here. So our primitives is just our global tokens. So we have the name of the color and it's just referring to the hex code directly. Then we've created some aliases. So for example, in this instance, we have some semantic tokens, so background, text, the face, we have the features of the face, and then we have the highlight color. And we can associate it to our global token here. And the way that we associate is if we detach it here, we can just go right click, create alias. And we want it to be this color here. And then we can also create different modes. So for example, we have our primary mode, we have an alternate color for this frame, and then we have a grayscale mode here. And because now I've associated a mode to each of these frames, when I drag this element across the frames, it reassociates those semantic variables to these new colors. So now let's look into the limitations of variables. Most of these impacts are seen when we're trying to use the variable modes. So the first limitation is that some properties cannot be variables. So when we're doing that comparison, some of those included multiple fills, images, videos, and gradients. So what that means is if you were to have variable modes, they would look the same in all the modes. The second limitation is we cannot apply variables to effects. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a frame here. Let's give it a fill so we can see it. And let's add an effect. So we have a drop shadow here. I'm just going to make it really big so we can see it. I'm going to make it 100%. And I'm going to make the color red. So let's say in one variable mode we want a red. Because we can't associate that to a variable, it's going to be red in all of our variable modes, which is a bit annoying. There is a workaround that I found on the internet, and the way that people would do that is they would just draw a fuzzy rectangle on the background. I mean, it's a really dodgy workaround, but it works. So that's a problem until they fix it. And the last thing is we can't actually apply styles in our variables. However, we can apply our variables to our styles. So let me just show you this diagram, which is quite useful. So again, if you have a variable, you can connect it to another variable, which is an alias, or we can implement it into a style. And I'll show you that when we go to creating styles and variables. Now let's look at creating our variables and styles. So there are 2 ways to do this. The first way is you just make it into your local library. So not selecting anything, you can hit the escape key to go back. So in our design tab, we see our local variables, and I can just open that and go create variable color. And that allows us to create a variable. Or with local styles, I can go add or create a style, color, and then I can call this gray. So there's our style. The easiest way to do it is you just select something on your artboard and make it through the styles panel. So with this color, I've written it here as well, but we have a single value of hex code F and the opacity is at 100%. So because it's a single value and it is a solid fill, I know I can make it into a variable. So what we can do is we open the style panel and we'll press this new variable button here. So because it knows it can be a variable, Figma suggests it to be a variable. So we can see here, we can actually make it into a style as well. So we can see style has the same thing, name, description, and we have our white color here. But because we can make it a variable, we want to make it a variable. So let's call this one white test. And there is our variable. We know it's assigned because it has this gray pill here. And now let's look at our 3 properties of variables. So I've written it out here. The first one is color scoping, which is we want to limit what this variable can be applied to. You know, maybe we want only this variable to be applied to text, and we can do that. So let me just open my local variable. So I just made this one called white test. So you want to go over here, actually, edit variable. So the first one was color scoping. So this tooltip is just indicating that if you go show and all, it also includes future properties, which is okay. But let's say we only want it to assign it to text. We can just turn these all off and just leave that on as text, but we'll just leave it on like this. We can also have a code syntax, which is how do we want this variable to be represented in code? And we can also hide it from publishing to our library. So let's get out of this. And let's now try to create this gradient. So same thing, I'm going to click on this gradient. I'm going to check my fill. And I can see this gradient here, but we don't want to press the plus up here. So we want to go to our style panel here. And we want to press plus. Even though it says new variable on the hover, because it knows it's a gradient, it's suggested to use the style over here. So we can see it's kept our gradient. However, if we want to force it to be a variable, so I'm going to go here, it's just going to change it to a solid color. So let's just go test, see what happens. See, it's forced it to be that single color. Let's just go undo because we want it to be a gradient. So what we want to do here, so we just go plus, it's on style. We will go gradient 1, create style. And you can see the styling is a bit different. So if I go back to this one, let me just go out of here. So if it has a pill, that means it's assigned to a variable. But if it looks like that, it's just assigned to a style. And I can also detach it in the same way. So now I want to show you how we can actually add variables within our styles. So we have the style already created, our gradient style, and I'm going to go ahead and edit it. Just going to bring it up here. We're just going to go here, edit style. And we can see in our style modal panel, under properties, we can add another fill. So I'm just going to press plus to add another fill. And instead of this custom fill, we want to associate it to a variable. So we just navigate to our libraries. And now we can see all our variables here. So I'm just going to add white test. And because it's opaque, it kind of hides that gradient here. But we can see in our properties, we can still see the pill, which is a sign that it's being associated to a variable. But overall, this element is still deemed as a style. So let's just remove this and we'll go back. And now let's try add a style into a variable, which you can't do. So we'll go to local variables up here. And now let's try to add this gradient style into this variable. I'm just going to right click, create alias. And what you can see is they actually hide all the styles in here because you can't associate a style to a variable. And just to double check, I'm going to type the word gradient and you can see there are no searches found. Let me leave with 3 ending thoughts. Try to use variables as much as possible. As seen in the video, variables unlock so many more opportunities and features than styles. If you don't know which one to use, just use whatever Figma suggests. And ultimately, if you don't need a proper design system, just do whatever is easiest for you. There's a video that also explains how we can convert styles into variables later. So if you have an existing file where you've created all your styles with a single color value, we can use plugins to just convert them into variables so that we can unlock these features. And that's all for now. Hopefully you've learned something about color styles and variables. If you have any additional questions around this topic, please leave them in the comments below. But otherwise, stay hydrated, take a break, rest your eyes, and I'll see you all next time.